A very vibrant edition of Question Time, I thought. I'm Hugh Edwards, the dominant silverback gorilla of news. Just time for Brexitcast now. Here's Laura Koonsberg.
Yes, I am Laura Koonsberg. I haven't slept for 3 years and I've been living on College Green so long I'm now technically classified as an urban fox. Welcome to Brexitcast.
Brexitcast from the BBC.
No one's got a clue what Brexit is.
Brexit is...
I hadn't quite understood the full extent of this. We're particularly reliant on the Dover-Calais crossing.
I met Boris Johnson once.
The doubters, the doomsters, the gloomsters, they are going to get it wrong again.
Remainers and leavers, that's going to end well.
A process which I can only describe as a dog's Brexit.
Thank you to Jan Ravens and John Coleshaw from Dead Ringers, impersonating some of our beloved colleagues. They will be back shortly as themselves. It's the real Adam Fleming at Westminster here.
And the real Katia Adler. I think we should just say we shall not be moved, a bit like the French strikers, and just take over this studio. Yes.
And I think the real Laura in I'm not just in a van, I'm in a whole satellite truck today in a lovely Matlock in Derbyshire.
Yeah, and I've been banished as well. It's Chris Mason here in Birmingham, been out on the campaign trail with Labour. It's still got my thermals on even into the evening, and they do get a bit clammy and whiffy by this time of night.
Okay.
Just thought I'd be honest, given them on my own.
Chris, why did you need your thermals on? What have you been doing?
Well, doing that classic thing, Adam, that reporters do rather a lot of, hanging about. So I've been following Jeremy Corbyn for the last couple of days. Today's been, so they hope, to focus on education, on schools. So he was at a school in Peterborough this morning, and then in Rugby, and then in Walsall, and then he's heading here to Birmingham. So doing all things schools and public services, but obviously as well today, lots of questions chasing him about anti-Semitism, given that submission that we've heard about submitted to the inquiry into all things anti-Semitism that is happening at the moment. So I've managed to retreat to somewhere inside, which means the thermals aren't strictly necessary, which is where they get a bit on the old sticky side.
And Laura, what have you been up to? What's your take on what's been happening today?
I've also been officially indulging in the reporter's habit of hanging about, but we have been hanging about waiting for and then listening to the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, who was here at a factory in Derbyshire, trying really, as we're now into the last week of the campaign, to get back to his number one message. And I don't think any Brexitcaster needs us to remind them of what his number one message is if he gets a working majority, just 9 more seats, as he keeps on telling people, then we would be leaving the European Union next month, according to his promise. But he, as ever, has had a bit of a tricky time over exactly what he's promising and whether or not it really stacks up, just as he's had throughout this campaign.
All of that is good fodder for the discussion we're going to have, because I don't know if you've realised, this is the last Brexitcast before the election.
Ooh.
It is.
Yeah, it is. So it's a momentous moment.
It's because the election's imposing on our Thursday, actually.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They've taken us off air for some election night programme instead, which will be just as good. So I thought maybe we'd actually just take this as an opportunity to just look back at the whole election campaign, which I suppose then means looking back at the whole year.
Yeah, but is it a year or is it... I feel like we've been in this for 2 years at least, really.
Years.
Yeah.
So I thought we'd just look at some of like the main messages of the parties and the party leaders, and then see what we can divine from them and what interesting campaign trail anecdotes that inspires. So first of all, let's hear from Boris Johnson. This is him, as Laura hinted, delivering his big message about getting Brexit done.
On Brexit, will there be tariffs and checks on goods moving from Northern Ireland into Great Britain?
Absolutely not. Absolutely
That's not what your Brexit secretary says, and he's looked at the law and he says there will have to be checks.
No.
So Stephen Barclay is wrong about that.
The beauty of
Stephen Barclay is your Brexit secretary.
Yes.
He said the exit summary declarations will be required in terms of Northern Ireland to Great Britain.
There will be no
He's wrong
tariffs.
about that.
No, absolutely. There will be no tariffs and there will be no checks. And what we will ensure is that the whole of the UK, Northern Ireland and the rest of us can come out. And the advantage of
talking about paperwork, which is going to affect Northern Ireland businesses both ways.
The advantage of the Conservative this election is we have 635 candidates who have all signed up, and they haven't been lobotomised, Andrew. They've all signed up perfectly freely from all spectrum of the party, a very, very good deal, which enables us to come out on January the 31st. It's a great deal for our country. We want to get it done.
Okay, there was a lot of stuff going on in that clip with Boris Johnson and Andrew Marr, but they started off with this idea about what paperwork businesses in Northern Ireland would have to fill in if they want to send stuff to the rest of the UK under the withdrawal agreement. And then it went into the whole bigger Brexit picture. Laura, what did that exchange, which contained a lot of stuff, reveal about the Conservative campaign and position on Brexit?
Well, I think it shows us that there was one very straightforward promise, but there are lots of question marks about what it would actually mean if the Tories are able to keep it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the reason that Boris Johnson called this election is because he got stuck in Parliament. He chucked some people out of the party, which meant he lost his majority. And although he performed what some people said would be impossible, which was getting a new Brexit deal, he then found, like Theresa May, he couldn't get that deal through Parliament. So here we are. That's why he's having the election. And just that feat of saying, look, I have a deal, is what he is using day after day after day after day to appeal to the country. He's saying, vote for me and I promise you it'll happen. I've got all my candidates signed up. But where he has also faced repeated questioning in the campaign is, but what would it actually mean if his deal goes through Parliament? So it's a bit, in a funny way, the Tories have found themselves a lot talking about the cart rather than the horse. Do you see what I mean?
But isn't it also because, I mean, the public is not stupid in that, getting Brexit done is a slogan. And, offering too many easy sort of answers, it just, in the end, when people think about it, it doesn't add up. And it's not just about leaving before the 31st of January. It's also about getting a trade deal by the end of the year. So certainly over the other side of the channel, the EU's always saying, where are the buts and where are the shades of grey rather than just the black and white when Boris Johnson speaks.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I think in this campaign we've seen on all parties actually be really, really pressed for what adds up, what stacks up. I think after the events of recent years, and certainly the parties being very willing this time to play fast and loose, particularly on social media with what they're saying and what's true. We've seen much more focus on how they deliver the things that are in their manifesto. But I do think that where getting Brexit done is not just a slogan, is if the Tories get a majority, it would remove the central question of British politics for the last few years, and what we talked about again and again and again on Brexitcast is whether this is going to happen at all. No question, people don't believe that easy promises, Katia, you're absolutely right, on either side of the channel. But if there is a Tory majority, that one question will have been answered. Is this thing actually going to happen or not?
And my favourite bit of the day was the Chancellor Sajid Javid being interviewed on the Today programme and them having a ding-dong about equivalence in financial services. An amazing preview of what we may have to look forward to in the next year or so. Right, Chris, you're our Corbyn correspondent for the day. Let's listen to Jeremy Corbyn on Question Time from a couple of weeks ago, where he basically spelt out that once he becomes Prime Minister, he's just going to kind of float above it all, Brexit-wise.
We will negotiate a credible leave deal with the European Union. Let me finish, please. I'm trying to answer the gentleman's question. Secondly, we will put that alongside Remain in a referendum. My role and the role of our government will be to ensure that that referendum is held in a fair atmosphere, and we will abide by the result of it. And I will adopt, as Prime Minister, if I am at the time, a neutral stance so that I can credibly carry out the results of that to bring our communities and country together rather than continuing an endless debate about the EU and Brexit. This will be a trade deal with Europe or remaining in the EU. That will be the choice that we put before the British people within 6 months. Any other option will require years of negotiations either with the EU or the USA and put our public services at risk.
Chris, analyse the Corbyn stance and how it's going down.
Well, I've been taking, Adam, this is my little pocket accompaniment the last couple of days on the road with the Corbyn campaign, the Labour manifesto. And, you have to get to page 87 before there's any conversation about Brexit. The final say on Brexit, as the chapter is titled. And, as you know, kind of what it says in there in the manifesto is what we just heard Jeremy Corbyn saying. And what's striking, and we've talked about this before, haven't we, on Brexitcast, is that, when you head out on the road, certainly the last couple of days with Mr Corbyn, well, we never got to page 87 because he was talking about other stuff instead. And when you speak to activists who are turning up at the events and cheering him when he arrives and all that kind of stuff, two things crop up pretty quickly in private conversations. One is selling that Brexit message, which is complicated, is difficult on the doorstep in the dark in December. And then the other thought is about Mr Corbyn himself and activists were saying to me this morning that they try and pitch to say, look, this is about a team, we're electing a team. In other words, they are trying to find a way of polishing over the fact that for some people at least, Jeremy Corbyn's a bit of a blockage.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was, been talking to Labour candidates in the last few days. And beyond, Jeremy Corbyn's very devoted core, which he does have a very, very avid kind of fan base, if you like. He is, for a lot of candidates, they say he is a big problem on the doorstep. And one candidate said to me this morning, actually, people raise Jeremy Corbyn as being a negative on the doorstep 5 times more than they raise the Brexit policy. And it's been one of the things about this election, actually. Both candidates have got really big detractors as well as big fans. They're both really flawed. That's been one of the characteristics. They both have got big critics inside their own parties as well as externally. But it's no question that the Labour Party knows they do have, and the polls bear this out as much as we should pay attention to them. They do have a problem around a lot of the public's attitude to the leader. They do. Conservatives have their own problems with Boris Johnson, but it is a big part of the picture.
Right, Jo Swinson of the Liberal Democrats. What a day she had yesterday. First of all, she got swarmed by a load of protesters dressed as bees. Then she got stung by Andrew Neil, like this.
The central pitch which you launched this campaign on, that you would reverse Brexit without a second referendum, that falls away since that needed a Lib Dem majority government.
Well, we've set out very clearly that we want to stop Brexit and every scenario how we will try to do that, and that obviously we will keep campaigning for a people's vote.
Right, but you are campaigning for that now, because since you've admitted you won't form the next government.
There's 8 days to go, but it looks like that's the more likely.
Not revoke Article 50 and stop Brexit without a referendum.
We've always said that we would want to do so through a democratic means, whether that was through an election or whether it's through a people's vote on the specific Brexit deal. Liberal Democrats have led that campaign. We came out immediately after the 2016 referendum and said we thought the specific Brexit deal should be put to the public for a final say, and we'll continue to do that.
So it's a second referendum you're looking for now?
We'd like a final say on the specific Brexit deal.
So interestingly, when it comes to the idea of a second referendum, you would assume that, the EU leaders are on the edge of their seat waiting for that to happen so that, this could be revoked. And actually, it's a mixed picture. Obviously, if there were to be a second referendum and UK would decide to stay in the EU, that would be accepted. But the idea of us always hovering by the door, the idea of a second referendum where it would just be in Remain's favour, that is something that the EU really doesn't relish. So I think, it is sort of assuming that a Brexit is going to happen. If there is a majority Conservative government, they will just push to get on and get this deal ratified. That doesn't mean, though, as it's being interpreted in some circles, that's what the EU wants. It wants to be able to move on with the rest of its life, if you like.
It's interesting that, because I suppose the perception in quite a lot of British politicians is still that actually the EU sort of wishes this couldn't all happen and they would jump at the opportunity for another referendum. And when you hear, Tony Blair, for example, actually sort of actively suggesting there should be a hung parliament so we get to another referendum, fascinating to hear actually that, on the other side of the channel, some people might think, oh, for goodness sake, why didn't you just get on with it after all?
Right, let's go to Nicola Sturgeon now. Here's her getting a grilling, the leader of the SNP.
As things stand, a Corbyn government promising a second Brexit referendum is your best hope.
I hope that any government that is elected, and you're right, that is more likely to be if it's a minority Labour government, would give the whole UK the opportunity to escape Brexit. But fundamental to this for me is that any party that is looking to the SNP for support has to be prepared to respect the right of the people of Scotland to choose their own future. And that means respecting the right, if the Scottish Parliament so chooses, to have an independence referendum.
And I suppose the thing that Nicola Sturgeon and Jo Swinson have in common with each other is that throughout the election campaign, we've been scrutinising them for what influence they would have on the government, probably a Jeremy Corbyn minority government, rather than seeing them necessarily as players in their own right, Laura, and what their price and their supporting them would be.
Yeah, I mean, what we have not done is what the sort of game everyone played in 2015, when it was always like, oh, it looks like a hung parliament. Which way is it going to go? Who would work with who? But what you can't find anybody, or maybe nearly anybody, who would say now it could be a Tory majority or a Labour comfortable majority. It's basically what all the polls suggesting, what all the politicians expect themselves, is that the Tories will be the biggest party, but they might not get a majority. So therefore, it is relevant to ask the Lib Dems and the SNP how they would work with Labour. Would they work with Labour? Would they work with Jeremy Corbyn? Would they back anyone for the promise of another referendum? And that is kind of both of them have even talked about it themselves. Nicola Sturgeon's talked about it very willingly. She's talked about how she might hold the balance of power. And of course, her price would be another independence referendum from Scotland at some point in the future.
Just chipping in on this, Laura, and you guys in Westminster, a wise old bean said to me the other day, and I hadn't thought of it in these terms before, talked about it being an asymmetric election, by which they meant, in terms of how we judge winners and losers afterwards, that the finishing line, if you like, for Boris Johnson is quite a bit further ahead than it is for Jeremy Corbyn, because for Boris Johnson to win, he has to win an overall majority. So you're talking what? I don't know if the numbers are going to be enough to sustain him, so maybe about 330, something like that, maybe a bit more. For Jeremy Corbyn to kind of win, he just needs to deny Boris Johnson a majority, and then who knows if he might be able to assemble some sort of government. Obviously, he'd love an overall majority if he could get it, but that sense that the kind of, in inverted commas, winning post is kind of in different places for the two of them. And when you throw that into the mix alongside the opinion polls and where they are and whether they may be tightened in the last few days or not, suddenly you realise the extent to which, yes, despite what so many polls and headlines say, there's a huge amount to play for.
It's interesting, though, because a different wise old bean, and there is more than one in the political universe, was sort of saying to me, actually, when you look at the kind of pendulum of history, Tories have been in for nearly 10 years, 9 years. They've been squeezing public spending. The fact that they are the ones who are more likely to get a majority, in historical terms, is kind of out of sync. But, everyone's got different finishing lines. That sounds very politically correct, doesn't it? Where's your finishing line? Everyone has a different finishing line.
And also
nothing wrong with that.
And then the speculation about how big a majority Boris Johnson would need to survive the trade negotiations with the EU and whatever potentially politically tricky deal is the end product of that. Right. There was a news story today about the Brexit Party. A group of Brexit Party members of the European Parliament said, don't vote for our party, the Brexit Party. Vote for the Conservatives, which put Nigel Farage, the Brexit Party leader, in this slightly tricky position, again, with Master Inquisitor Andrew Neil.
Hang on, in this
four of your MEPs, a week before polling day, have resigned and said, vote Tory.
All right, well, let's just run through that very quickly. One of them is the sister of a cabinet minister.
What's that got to do with it?
Hang on. One of them is the sister of a cabinet minister.
Smear.
Another one has a boyfriend working for that cabinet minister. Fact. And another one is a personal friend of Boris Johnson's. Now, they joined, not smears, they're facts.
So yet again, the Brexit Party's role in the general election 2019 being about not what the Brexit Party is actually doing itself, but what effect it has, basically, on Conservative candidates. Now, Katja, this is a blast from the past in the Brexit process. A leaked document from Brussels.
That's right. A leaked document that isn't 100% document proof, if you know what I mean. It's not
definitely
going into your binder. It's these leaked summit conclusions. Don't you love that? Always that before the EU summit, which will be the day of the election here, will be for Thursday and Friday. There's always a leak about what the leaders are going to conclude because there's so many meetings beforehand. Anyway, so when it comes to Brexit, you can see them again also in a slightly difficult position because they've got to hedge their bet. Will there be a majority for the Conservative Party enough to sort of, push the deal through Parliament? And what will that mean for the European Parliament? Will they have to sit earlier than they might want to in order to ratify it on the European side? If Labour manages to form some kind of minority government and there's a second referendum, they've got to change their stance in the EU as well. So we've seen things like today that whether they need to agree a further general political direction as necessary. So depending on the outcome here.
Really interesting, because I suppose at the end of the day, we all try and divine every single sign, don't we? But as you've just said, in the end, they're going to have to deal with whatever the UK system comes up with, aren't they? Despite all the noises off and all the sounds and, as we know, all the hesitation and doubts they had about having to deal with Boris Johnson when he was running to be the leader of the Tory party before. Doesn't that seem like about 100 years ago already?
It does, yeah.
And also, from reading between the lines of those draft summit conclusions, which may change, I wondered if there's a few little references in there to how little time is available. Is the EU preparing to cut a few corners in its normal process? And there's loads of speculation amongst Brussels types about will the final product next year be a really slimmed down trade deal that is exclusively negotiated between the UK and the European Commission, which means it can be signed off at leader level without
all the
different parliaments from Bulgaria to Portugal, wherever. And so actually you could be much quicker if you slim it down.
Before you raise people's hopes too much, I think the idea of like cutting corners will be very much also on the UK side. If the UK is happy to sign up to what the EU asks for in order to get that quick, dirty and non-dusty, whatever, just to get it done quickly by December next year. Not dusty, just dirty. Then the UK would have to sign away some of its sovereignty as well.
Right, I'm going to bring in some special guests. Come in. It is Jan Ravens and John Culshaw from Deadbringers. Have a seat.
Hello.
Have a seat. You guys have been watching the unique production process, the slick Brexitcast machine.
So high tech. So high tech, I can't believe it.
It's very symbolic of the campaign itself.
Rambunctious.
Yes,
and
exactly.
Slightly
spontaneous.
Yeah. So you guys are going to do a special episode of Dead Ringers, basically based on the election result.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it's always very exciting. We did the last one was the referendum, and normally we record Dead Ringers the night before, and it gets edited the following day and goes out on the Friday night. But we have to obviously wait for the result of the election. So the poor writers are kind of typing away through the night with kind of eyes down here. And we do it, but it really makes for some sort of exciting scripts. I mean, it feels very sort of like we're part of the news. It's very kind of like.
Well, you're going to be doing a lot of Hugh Edwards, aren't you, John?
I think so, yes. He will be binding everything together, making the announcements and throwing it across to whoever it might be. Yes, Hugh Edwards here, proper buffed up for the Instagram generation.
And I, of course, will be being Laura, who's like, the puppet master. I mean, my theory is that Laura actually kind of has she's like the sort of necromancer of news, and she creates all these stories. She whispers in David Cameron's ear that a referendum might be a good idea. It's me, the Koonsberg, I'm pulling the strings.
Actually, Laura, do you want to take this opportunity to deny the Deadbringers theory that you are responsible for all of this?
Yes.
There we go.
Yes.
She couldn't have been
Completely
clearer.
deny it. Yes. I totally deny it. I completely and utterly deny any suggestion that I would ever enjoy a news story.
That really comes across that you're hating every minute, I must say.
But John,
did that not wash? Did it not wash at all?
Nah.
I think Laura's actually got to go.
Get your
It's been
thermals
fun,
on and
I
get
think.
out there.
Right, bye, Laura. Bye, Laura.
Thank you for the clarity you bring to complexity.
Yes.
Right.
Yes,
Who has stood out for you, politician-wise, in this election campaign? And that's just an excuse to make you do some impressions.
Okay.
I think probably Andrew Neil. The interviewer that people want to avoid if they can. Yes, no. And there you have it. It's
Actually, I'm really impressed with Katja. I mean, Katja is to me kind of, a bit like Kirsty Walker in that, you're too sort of, you're too impressive to do an in-person, because, you're always sort of so articulate and so sort of, there you are freezing your tits off outside somewhere in Brussels, and with your lipstick still and your little appley-dapply cheeks, and it's just sort of, I mean, I'm sort of like amazed, I'm stunned, and always sort of so much more articulate and making so much more sense than the politicians.
John, we're looking forward to the head-to-head Boris Johnson, Jeremy Corbyn, hosted by Nick Robinson. Could you do all three in one?
Oh my God.
Yes, now then. So, Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, you have got trust issues. People are finding it very difficult to trust you. How are you going to put that right? Well, look, Nick, let me just let me just say, and I will take on my Neanderthal stoop as I do so, and I will speak with a bluster at a great rate of knots, and with humour put in for the suitable distractions, and hopefully leave a little time for you to answer proper questions, and that is how I will get through this. Okay, thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Corbyn, you finally apologised over anti-Semitism the other day to Philip Schofield. Yes, of course, obviously I did that, and of course I shall be holding in a lot of very intense sort of rage like this and trying to not nod like an instrument or an ornament on the parcel shelf of a Morris Minor. I say thank you for your support. I say thank you to the membership. I say thank you for the music, the songs I'm singing.
Yay! That was so good. But both of you, because you don't see yourself, you do the same. Like you embody, your character as well as the voice. It's wonderful to watch you both. I love it.
You sort of have to, because you're doing Diane Abbott.
And
those
Diane
two,
Abbott. The two, Andrew Neil and Diane Abbott, those were the ones that made me fall over normally while I was running. They were so good when you were doing the two of them.
Yeah, the two of them together was a joy. And Diane Abbott, I mean, to do the impression of Diane Abbott, you just have to sort of imagine that you've just been woken up from a really nice nap. Because it's sort of like, and it's Jeremy and I, and I mean, she's just a gem. I mean, she's been keeping quite quiet, actually, hasn't she?
Of course, in this slot, it used to be Andrew Neil and Diane Abbott.
And
how do you think they're reacting when they sat at home together watching The Replacement, watching this cheap bargain basement alternative podcast?
Well, Diane is probably greatly missing the little red sofa that seemed to get littler and littler as time went by, and she and Michael Portillo got closer and closer.
We were very cosy, weren't we? Very, very cosy.
Very cosy, Michael.
But yes, I think that's what a great episode of Gogglebox that would make if that was to happen.
And Jan, do you have a problem that there are now two prominent Scottish women from the west coast of Scotland?
Yes, it is a bit of a problem. I mean,
there's three, including Laura. So Jo Swinson, Nicola Sturgeon,
yes.
and Laura.
Laura's got the slight sort of. She's got something of a sort of twist in it somehow. Whereas Nicola Sturgeon is that she's sort of got that, like, you want some. It's like she's like a wee little hold me back before I lamp somebody. And Nicola Sturgeon does that thing as well of accentuating every other syllable with a nod of her head. She's sort of like that. And Jo Swinson is. I mean, she's like a work in progress, but she's like she's got like a thinner register, like a higher pitch. So, but yes, I wouldn't want to do a sketch like John just did where they're both talking to each other. Please don't make me do that.
And presumably having Donald Trump here in our backyard was great for you this week.
I think, look, we're starting to see the pattern. Whenever he doesn't know something, he'll say, we'll have to wait and see what the final facts are. We'll wait and see. I'm sure Boris will do a good job. Jeremy Corbyn, I don't really know him, even though I've said I know him before and I've said stuff. I really don't know, but I love being here. It's a very wonderful country. It's been very interesting seeing the sense of there they were, Macron and Boris and Princess Anne and Mr. Trudeau, sort of gossiping about him. And there he was with that sulk. It's very terrible. He's two-faced. I'm going home.
Yeah, he's got that sort of petulant mouth, hasn't he?
Very much so, like some sort of tropical fish waiting to be fed.
So in this political array, can you say, both of you, who your favourite political characters are?
Of course, I've been missing Theresa because she's just sitting on the back benches now, going, not as bloody easy as you thought it was, is it? And I mean, people sort of say to me, "Oh my God, you must miss Theresa so much." And I was going, "Well, no, I was actually glad she went because she just seemed to be getting, she just wouldn't stop. You had to go, no, I must go on, inching slowly forward like a slug crawling over the edge of a glass of beer. I know oblivion beckons, but I must go forward into the beer, the sweet beer I can drown in." It just looked like the whole thing was a nightmare. I hope it wasn't as much of a nightmare as it looked.
Right, we've got to go. There's loads of dead ringers to come, isn't there?
Yes, there's Christmas specials. It's just a short series of 3, but there's, I think, a Christmas special.
Yes, Christmas special, the election special on the 13th itself, and a review of the decade as well, 2010 to 2020. So there'll be some old favourites as well as the new. Yes.
Well, you'll be exhausted from having all these. You'll need an exorcism at the end of it to get all these characters out by the time you actually sit down for Christmas lunch.
They're spaced out a bit, I mean, our work isn't nearly as exhausting as yours, I shouldn't think. At least we have our coats on, At least we're in a nice warm studio.
Yes, sometimes too warm. Right, that's it from us. Do you guys want to say goodbye in the characters of Laura and Chris, because we've lost them both?
Okay, see you later. Thank you for listening. And we agree with you. Yeah.
Well, I'll no doubt be back before you can even blink because I'm never off. I'm always, always on, and I'll be here until the end of time giving my analysis. That's that. Here's another big pink coat with 98 layers of thermals. Good night.
And now the news where you are.
Brexitcast.
Brexitcast.
From the BBC.